Hi, my name's Phil. I'm a psychotherapeutic counsellor, an EMDR practitioner, and a clinical supervisor. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about projection, especially in relation to people who have abandonment issues. So, when we think about projection, we think about it being a defense mechanism. We all have it, it's absolutely useful for survival. And it's the way that our brain sort of uses all of the signals it's picking up from the environment via the use of our senses to form an understanding of what's going on and are we safe in that environment. So if our brain is functioning at a healthy level, we aren't traumatized, we don't have PTSD, we haven't had a lot of historical trauma, we're more likely to be reacting more rationally to sort of things happening in our environment. Whereas if we've got more trauma in our system, we're more likely to be acting sort of reactively to those sort of situations, because the brain is more likely to interpret threats. So a good example of this would be if you were walking through a woodland in England and you heard a rustle in the trees. If you were someone who didn't have a lot of hypervigilance in your system, your brain would know you're in England. There's no dangerous animals around here. Biggest threat would be a human. Does it sound like a human? It sounded less. It could be an animal, could be a squirrel. So the brain will be figuring out all of this stuff, and it might then project that no, the risk is minimal here. So that projected belief might be how we respond to it. But if we were saying in a jungle in India and we heard a rustle, the brain's got a lot more sort of, even the person who isn't traumatized would still be at a higher level of elevation, because there's dangerous animals in those forests. There's less likely in England to be bitten by a snake or some sort of insect that could cause a lot of pain and trouble. So the brain in that situation. But of course, if you're traumatized, or you're in a hyper state of arousal, your brain, wherever you go, is like being in that Indian jungle. It's perceiving things as being very dangerous, even when you're not in an Indian jungle, you're in an English one, in an English forest. So the brain is perceiving the environment to be a bigger danger than it is, and that's typically due to elevated, levels of stress in the system due to trauma, or psychological systems or processes that we might have. So when we think about the abandoned people with abandonment issues, obviously they will have suffered some sort of neglect or rejection from childhood. Now, that isn't always that it was done badly by their parents to them. It could be that they had a sibling who was very ill when they were very young, and so the parents had to spend a lot more time looking after the young sibling. So of course, if you're being left watching everyone else getting the attention, you're almost like those chicks in the nest, that this one, if I don't get fed, I'm going to die. That one's getting all the feeding. Well, why aren't I getting the attention? So that the brain starts to project that the risk here, I could die, I could survive, and it will sort of develop a process to cope, maybe a dissociative process or some way of coping, or it might try to become more aggressive to get its needs met. So we're all unique in how we respond to these situations, but often you know, it's with the people with abandonment issues, it doesn't necessarily mean that they were neglected, you know, you know, in all sorts of horrendous abuse that we hear. It doesn't always mean that at all. It could be that the parents were, just too busy working, struggling to make ends meet, so they couldn't quite meet those needs for attention that the child needed. And, so the child has developed a sort of a reaction to that abandonment, which it then takes on into later life. But often victims of abuse, even if they're not been abused by a family member or someone close, can still end up with very similar sort of personality styles later on in life, because it's almost like the brain, when that person was getting abused, the brain is thinking, I've been abandoned here. Where are my parents? Why aren't they protecting me? How's this happening to me? So there can be that sense that I've been abandoned in this. I'm on my own. I'm feeling very childlike. I'm powerless. Where are my protectors? So of course, victims of abuse might also generate very powerful feelings of abandonment. So when we think about when people with abandonment issues grow older and they get involved in relationships, often when they meet someone, the relationship can become very intense very quickly, because meeting someone they really like or really meets a need for them sort of meets those needs that didn't quite get met when they were a child, that somebody's there, somebody actually wants them, someone's got their back, someone, and so they get quite excited by that. And it can become a very intense sort of idealizing sort of, within the process. And the other person will, of course, maybe react very positively to that because they're meeting someone who's just, really infatuated with them, really wants to be that close to them, so that might be meeting a sense of value that they didn't get met in childhood as well. But that would be another issue to look at into another time. But of course, once this sort of relationship has developed a little bit and the idealizing, you know, has been happening, and the relationship starts to naturally form at a deeper level, starts to become a bit more intimate, a bit less just idealizing, a bit more solid, that solidity tends to trigger the projections in the abandoned child that, oh, if I get too close to this person is going to abandon me. And they will start to maybe believe that. So they will start to maybe feel very anxious around, because anything then that their partner does might be perceived as a way of them trying to get out of the relationship. So if they aren't answering their phone, of course the abandoned child within the brain will be projecting into that void that, oh, that person doesn't want to talk to me anymore. That's it. They're abandoning me. They're leaving me. There's no possibility in that young child's projection defense that the phone has batteries run out, or this person's working, or they just can't get back, or they'll ring in their coffee break. That's not a possibility, because you're not dealing with an adult logic. You're dealing with the child part of the brain has been activated, which is all based around the survival of abandonment. And 2-year-olds don't really get the concept that the battery might have run out in the phone. They just think, why aren't you meeting my needs now? And you're not meeting my needs now, so my brain is going to project that you're bad, you're not good for me, you're doing what was done to me when I was a child, so I need to do something about this. So that might activate rage. It will typically also activate a deep sense of shame within the abandoned child, because they're once again believing that they're not good enough to get attention. Now, this might be just as a result of the projection that they're perceiving they're going to be abandoned by the other. So the projection is setting off all of these patterns of behavior and this huge reaction to actually something that might not even be there. Of course, it might be there. It might be that their partner is someone who wants them to be in a hypervigilant place. So they might be actually playing some sort of psychological game, pulling away to see how their partner reacts to that. Because if they're searching for someone with abandonment issues so they can maybe control them in this way, some people will have process that will do that, and that will be relate to issues within their childhood, which is another video. But there'll be a lot of that going on, and often these two types of characters are drawn together to replay this drama. But if we stick with the abandoned child, the abandoned person is actually believing in that moment the projection that the other person is a threat. And quite often, one of the ways that the brain will then deal with that, because it gives you options, doesn't it? Fight, flight, freeze, or appease. It's very similar to a PTSD reaction when they go into that place of fear, because after all, when they were a child and they believed they were being abandoned, that their brain believed that they were going to die. They literally believed that I'm going to die because of this abandonment. So that's how they're reacting in the situation. It's why their reaction is so big in the present, is because their brain believes that this is a real threat. This person leaves me. They're not thinking rationally now. They won't die just because people don't die when adults don't die when they get abandoned. They get left, they get heartbroken. It's not like an abandoned child will starve to death, but that's what the abandoned child's brain is thinking is going to happen, you see. So, but that is all split off. It's all out of awareness, and the energy of that fear is now probably being converted into anger or shame. So the person will start feeling very shamed and bad about themselves and very angry at the other, rather than feel the fear. And so the brain will then sort of react with those emotions instead. And it's a self-defensive mechanism. It's called racket feelings, and which is a lot in TA theory uses that. And we can talk a little bit about that later to understand it. But the key here is that once these projections happen, the relationship will be sabotaged. And because once the child, the abandoned child has pushed that person away because they're a threat to them, they'll start to feel safer, but they also might then yearn and crave for that connection back again. Then you see, because of course they have abandoned themselves, but they're thinking they've got out. They've had the choice to abandon themselves, so that makes it easier for them. So they might start actually wanting that attention back from that person again, and then they might go back, and it might become like a bit of a push-pull dynamic. But the more times they do that, the more likely that peace and harmony section when they're back together will become diminished over time. That will become a shorter and shorter period, because the brain is in a sense of projection around this partner all of the time, and they still believe they're a threat. But when they pull away, when they've sabotaged or they've detached, when the abandonment process has made them push away, then they might, because there's lack of intimacy in the relationship, they'll be drawn to go back to it, to get that need met again. But then that need terrifies them, so they push it away again. And the projection will be creating all of this all of the time. And they will be projecting that their partner is thinking they're a bad person. And there'll be so much shame being generated by this process, which is really sad, because these people have been really, really hurt when they were children, absolutely damaged by the abandonment they experienced when they were there. But it makes them reenact it in the present via projection is a big part of that process. So I hope you liked the video. I'll do some more on this subject because it's a big subject, and on the types of people that are drawn towards the abandoned children. So if you like the video, please give it a like and subscribe, or send it on to someone else, and I'll do another one shortly. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.